Chapter 16 goes into our marine and coastal systems, and we're going to basically look at the different parts of the ocean. So just so you know, like anything else, the ocean can also have dead zones, areas of low oxygen because of nutrient uptake. So we've seen it in rivers, in lakes, again in the ocean. Different layers of the ocean include the continental shelf, the rise, and the oceanic ridge. If you take a look at the oceanic ridge, remember that's a divergent plate boundary, so the plates are splitting apart. We have a trench over here that's subducting, going under the other plate, and we are causing a trench and an island arc during that location. So ocean salinity is about 3.5% or 35 parts per thousand. It's actually lower near the equator due to the amount of rain that we see at the equator, and it's higher salinity at 30 degrees north and south latitude due to the amount of evaporation in the warm desert type areas. So more evaporation means the water is removed, leaving more salt behind. So at 30 degrees north and south, it's actually saltier. Water's heat capacity influences coastal climates because it actually takes a lot of energy to heat water and a lot of energy to cool water. That's why, if you think about it, we don't go into Lake Michigan to swim really until August because it takes so long for that lake to heat up. And additionally, the water keeps Chicago cooler in the summer as compared to the suburban temperatures. There are main currents to know and understand. So this picture goes through the currents. The two that you should know are the California current and the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream brings the warm water from the Caribbean up the East Coast and shoots over to England. England is actually warmer in the winter than Minnesota, even though it's further north. And that's due to the warm water that's creating the climate of the northern European countries. And without this warm current, this would pretty much be uninhabitable. California current is the one that drops down this way. And that's actually a cold current. And that brings the cold water down from Alaska. And it involves a lot of upwelling. And we're going to take a look at the upwelling process here in just a second. So here's how upwelling works and why it's so important. So upwelling has 3 steps. If you look in this image here, the 3 steps are depicted for you. Essentially, the wind blows along the coast, causing the surface water to move away from land. And when this moves away, something's got to replace it from underneath. So the cold, cool, nutrient-rich water from the bottom replaces it. That nice, good nutrient and cold water is going to cause phytoplankton that's right here in this shallow area to bloom and be happy, which causes then more animals to want to be around because they have a food source, which then causes bigger animals to come around. And basically most of the life in the ocean is found on the coastline because, one, that's where photosynthesis and photosynthetic zones are. And that's also where upwelling is going to sustain the nutrients needed. So it's a huge, big thing, and we wouldn't have life on the coast without it. Thermohaline and the ocean conveyor belt, it's kind of the same name for both. That's basically the ocean conveyor belt of currents that keeps Europe warm, again, with 2 factors. It's going to look at temperature and salt. So warm water is going to be low in salt, and it's going to stay also on the surface because it's less dense. Cold water is going to carry more salt, and it's going to be more dense, and it's going to drive below the warmer water and stay deep down. And that's going to just basically cycle throughout our world. If these currents change, there's a huge impact on the global climate of these coastal areas. Because again, the only reason why this area is habitable is due to the fact that the warm air gets brought over here. If something happens and these climates shift, we are in for a doozy. El Nino, La Nina cause global changes to rainfall, wind, ocean circulation, and they also influence upwelling and geographic factors. So we're going to take a look at these more and reinforce them in classroom activity. But essentially, we have the normal condition right here. We have Peru on this side, and we have Asia on this side. The winds blow towards Asia normally, and the water then from below replaces what blows away. So upwelling occurs in Peru. Well, this is amazing because then it's going to enhance the phytoplankton, which will advance the fish. So the fishing is actually really good in Peru when upwelling is occurring. Additionally, the hot, dry, moist, moist air is going to cause more raining in monsoons in Asia. Now, every 5 to 7 years, these winds start to die off. And because they're not blowing this way super fast, they're going to actually start to slosh back towards Peru. When that occurs, we start to see the die off of the water, and more rain starts to occur in Peru. The warm water is now all in Peru, which is going to fuel those storms. Fishing starts to decrease because the upwelling has stopped in this location. Warm water is coming this way, sitting on top, so cold water does not travel upward. In fact, it's going this way now. Marine biomes. These guys are going to supply a lot of Earth's oceans and take in CO2 with the help of their algae. So they're huge with producing our oxygen and taking in carbon dioxide. The important biomes for the oceans are the coral reef, marshlands, and estuaries. Marine natural resources vary a lot though due to different salinities, depths, turbidity, which is the visibility in the water, and nutrient levels and temperatures, which makes sense. You're going to see different things living in different locations based off of salts and temperature. Here are the zones for your marine environments. We have the photic zone, which would be the light. The intertidal is going to be the tide pools, and these are really super, like back here, harsh conditions because there's waves crashing in, and during low tide the water's gone. So these organisms are extremely adapted to like crazy extreme environments. Pelagic zone is the basically swimming area, and the benthic is the bottom of the ocean where you're not going to see any light. Marine ecosystems in the oceans, like salt marshes. We talked a little bit about these in the last chapters, but marine biomes like salt marshes, those are found in temperate areas like California, and the mangroves are found in tropical areas like Florida. And they're all types of marine ecosystems, or marshes, if you want to call them that. Volo bogs would be our freshwater system like this, found in the continent. But again, these are all wetlands, so everything is pretty much covered by soil and water. Here's the mangrove trees, here's the salt marshes. Estuaries are wetlands where rivers meet the ocean and have like that semi-saltish water. Corals are tropical and mutualistic. They have zooxanthellae, which basically those are a type of algae that lives mutualistically with the coral, and it gives the coral its color. If the temperatures get too hot or the water's too polluted, that algae will actually die off, and we call that coral bleaching. Now, it's not really bleaching, but essentially the coral's not going to survive because the algae that lives with it has gone away. There are benefits for coral. It gives biodiversity. It's a nursery for fish. It does absorb wave energy on the coastline, so it does slow down the waves so erosion isn't occurring on the coast. It allows for tourism. There are threats to corals as well. We have different fishing techniques that are actually threatening coral and destroying it. We cut it for shipping. If it's blocking a port in an island, they actually cut the coral reef. Sewage and toxins are another threat to that location, as well as ocean acidification. Sediment runoff will clog them, and destructive fishing. Been there twice. Talk about trash in the ocean. You guys have heard a lot about this in your lifetime, but trash in the ocean circulates through these things called gyres. And gyres are basically circular currents where the water is cycling and cycling. So any solid floating in the water essentially gets stuck in this like whirlpool. So all of the trash is collecting at the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and there's one also in the Atlantic as well. And this pollution has an effect on wildlife in many ways, as you can see in the pictures. Them choking and eating it accidentally or getting stuck in it. All right. Oil spills. Oil pollution. Deepwater Horizon was an oil platform, and that's probably the most recent big destructive oil spill. Happened in the Gulf of Mexico. It spilled millions of crude oil into the Gulf over a couple of months before they could finally stop it. The Exxon Valdez spill was the one that happened in Alaska, where the boat kind of ran up on shore. It prompted procedures for oil tankers to actually have double haul, so it would hopefully slow down and or prevent spills if the boat had some sort of accident. Most of the oil, though, that does seep into the oceans is from natural sources. But unfortunately, some of these big devastating accidents pump in quite a bit in a short period of time, which is kind of a tipping point. The death from hydrocarbons with animals occurs when their feathers or fur are actually covered, preventing them from floating or flying. And when oil sinks, it will cover organisms that are on the bottom of the ocean as well. So oil on beaches, though, has an economic consequence with the fishing industry and then tourism as well. There are different methods to clean up oil. There are booms, which corral that oil so that skimmer boats can suck it up. They have genetically modified bacteria that actually can be sprinkled in the area and that will digest the oil. And there are dispersions, which are basically chemicals that can break the oil up into smaller pieces that are more manageable to try to dispose of. But we don't know the long-term impacts of those chemicals yet. Again, with eutrophication in the ocean, remember excess nutrients from fertilizer runoff and sewage can cause algal blooms or red tides. We call them red tides in certain areas basically because that particular plankton is called dinoflagellates. And when it dies off, it gives off this red color. Also, toxins are given off at this time, which can actually cause shellfish in that area to be contaminated. So if we ever have a red tide, they actually stop selling some of the shellfish because of the toxins that are given off by the dinoflagellates' death. We don't want to get sick from it. Ocean acidification is an important thing to understand, and we'll come back again and again. This occurs when carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels gets dissolved in the ocean and then reacts to make carbonic acid, which is H2CO3, and that lowers the pH in the ocean, so it makes the ocean more acidic. Animals that have shells that are made of calcium carbonate, which is CaCO3, like corals and other organisms, their shells can't handle the low acidity and they actually start to dissolve. And when we start to see this happening, obviously organisms are dying and corals are starting to die. And this isn't a huge drop in acidity. This is a small, slight drop, but it's enough to erode their shells, cause problems. So we are seeing this as a big problem in the oceans. Overfishing is another huge issue. In the next 20 years, 90% of all the fish will be lost in the ocean. So biodiversity will be hit hard at that point, especially in certain countries like Asia that rely heavily on the ocean for their proteins. They're going to see a huge hit over the next 20 years if this trend starts to continue. We are in a little bit of a better spot because we have land animal protein that we eat, so we can balance that out. Fishing technology has caused a lot of this problem with overfishing because fishermen now have the ability to use sonar and satellites, thermal sensing to be able to catch huge amounts in a short period of time. Because of that, populations are starting to crash. We're not leaving enough individuals around to sustain the population afterwards. So that's huge. Bycatch is whenever we catch something that we shouldn't have, like the dolphin or the turtle that's found in the net. We have different fishing techniques that are right here that you should know. One of the worst ones is bottom trolling. This is destructive because actually it scrapes the bottom of the habitats, and this is what's going to destroy the coral reefs as well. So make sure you know the pictures and the captions of the fishing techniques, and think about how this relates back to tragedy of the commons when populations of fisheries collapse. So the Fish and Wildlife Services have managed fishing through maximum sustainable yield, and this is basically a quota. When you get a fishing license or you have that rule of you can only catch and keep certain size fish, or you can't keep females, or the season for this particular animal is only this time to this time, it's put in place due to Fish and Wildlife Services trying to allow sustainability. So they will manage fishing specifically by quotas, amount of time for the season. So think deadliest catch, they only have like 4 days or something. You can only keep fish of a certain size. Maybe they prevent all the females so that they're able to go on and spawn, or the number of fish you can catch. This allows for reproduction of the population in the future, and also marine protected areas and reserves are established for where fishing can occur. Fishermen actually like this because it allows for these animals to mature and then maybe spawn new populations that will leave those reserve areas so the fishermen can actually find them. So it increases diversity in habitats. And that is all for chapter 16.